So thank you everybody for joining us today. We are extremely pleased for those who are part of the conversation to provide us some feedback on this proposal. And we also want to chat with you about participation in working groups. The way that NSF has done the funding on this particular project is that you have the money for the first 2 years. And so you do some initial work, but then during those 2 years, you plan for even a larger amount of work that you want to do through years 3 through 10. And it's the working groups that play a dominant role in then deciding where should the bulk of the investment money really go. And that's why it's very important that we have the communities who need to be working in this space together. From a logistical perspective for today, recorded, please introduce yourself in chat, and we're going to share that chat record with everybody after the call. And that way we can all get to know each other. Feel free to include a link or something like that in it if you think that would be helpful. Please also use the chat to make comments and ask questions. For those of you who have been on various panels and workshops that we've had associated with a couple of BOEM projects, you know we've done this in the past, and it's been extremely, extremely helpful as we go through slides and you hear ideas. If something tweaks in your mind, just drop it in the chat. From a timing perspective, we know when the comment was made, and then that's really helpful for us because any subset of people only have a limited understanding. So your folks' participation on the call and the ideas that come to your mind are going to be really, really helpful to us. And we're going to use some of those questions you put forth in chat to incorporate into the discussions. Some of us from the team are going to stay online to 11:30 to see if there's other questions. And we're going to be using Jamboard, which we'll describe later on. And then we'll have some office hours next week for just people to be able to come and ask various questions, share some thoughts, etc., on the proposal that is going to be shared following this one. So let me just reduce this size a little bit here, 1 sec, so that we get the screen the way I want the screen to be. Okay. Oh, I guess you don't need to see me. I'll put myself in there regardless. Okay, so our proposal is called Accelerating a Just Energy Transition While Nurturing Healthy Oceans and New Blue Economies Through Innovative Nature-Inclusive Offshore Wind Farms. So you see a motivation here in the top right image, which is adjacent to one of the monopiles that you see here down at the coastal Virginia offshore wind site. So you put stuff in the water, marine growths and habitats are attracted to it. This is an image created by an artist that did this work for us at Tufts. So this is a description of what nature inclusive design elements may consider, right? So you're doing things, be that the nature of the surface of the concrete, the texture, the materials you're using, perforations, scour protection, and other types of things to actually bring benefits to the fisheries as well as the overall marine ecosystem. And in offshore wind, as you know, the scales have increased such that this is actually a scuba diver here, low resolution, but this gives you sort of a sense of scale. So I'll do a little bit of introduction to what this NSF program is about. Then we will have an overview, talk about the team and structure, our strategic and implementation plans, and then our long-term sustainability plan as well. So this is, I'm going to move this to a different location. 1 sec. This is a brand new thing for NSF, and it's sort of the boldest thing that they've done. They've created this new directorate called the Technology Innovation Partnerships. And I think there's some elements of what was described that's extremely well written. And I'm actually going to take a minute or two to actually describe what NSF says this is explicitly about. So facing global competition for talent and leadership in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics research and education, the U.S. must expand its innovation capacity by leveraging the resources, creativity, and ingenuity that exists across all geographic regions of the country, right? We obviously have some regions that are stronger than others, and NSF has recognized the U.S. used to be in the leadership on almost all research fronts, but other communities, particularly Europe and China, have actually been investing significantly more than we have. So this is a brand new, bold initiative. It's a different type. It's about these regional innovation ecosystems, and it's about advancing critical technologies, national and societal challenges, and you need things that you need very significant partnerships to be able to do effectively. They have some smaller size awards if you're just trying to develop ideas. What we've applied for is these $160 million Type 2 engines over 10 years. NSF is expecting that they're going to get more money into this program of a significant nature because there's support from Congress about the US being more competitive globally as it pertains to use-inspired research and advancing US industry. So they're planning on doing some things that are even larger levels of funding down the line. So when they were describing the program, they said, sort of, what is it about? Well, it's about R&D innovation to achieve regional and economic growth, right? You need partnerships. We have to figure out how we translate innovation to practice and comprehensive workforce development. In the area that we're working and in all activities, it's all about creating a very inclusive innovation ecosystem to try and address some of the disparities we know very much that we have in society. And it's something that they want to last for a very long time. So this is something we actually think is very feasible given our topic and how we expect growth to develop, monies in the industry, et cetera. And the engine is supposed to be really flexible from the leadership, accountability, and in order to be able to constantly be revising objectives based on what is learned. There's a couple points that they suggest are key considerations. One is sort of the region of service. And with that, they said, we don't want you to just have a proposal on something you could do anywhere. And to some degree, you could say that for biotech, microelectronics, AI, et cetera. When we're looking at our application, which is in the ocean between south of Massachusetts to, Virginia, our area is really defined about where there's going to be this $120 billion investment in offshore wind energy. And so we think actually we have a really nicely defined region. And as well, what it describes is you need these partnership stakeholders, is driven by applications, et cetera. And when we read through what this NSF proposal was asking for, we said, hey, it's really nice. In fact, actually wrote something specific for what is really needed in the area of offshore wind energy. So that was our impression. Where did NSF get this idea from? Maybe not, but Europe has invested $175 billion in use-inspired research, looking at increasing global competitiveness and addressing some of their societal disparities that they have. And so when you read what NSF is doing, I think they're saying, wow, Europe really succeeded this way. NSF wants to play a much larger role in this space. One of the 5 areas that the Horizons program has invested in is healthy oceans. And therefore, that's why in Europe, they are at the forefront in many areas. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan. So the US is at a really critical moment. Wind energy is essential to meeting the climate carbon reduction goals that the US has set. And with that $120 billion that Dan mentioned of offshore wind development over the next 10 years, we'll be putting out into the waters 30 gigawatts of power. But that faces both technical and environmental and community challenges. As many of you know on this call who've worked in it, there's been technical challenges, but there are also been environmental challenges as well as community challenges. And the US is behind the rest of the world with wind energy deployments. Today, there's only 7 turbines off the coast of the US compared to the over 3,000 in the EU. And if you look at who the suppliers are, the majority of the suppliers and then the majority of the developers are European. And China today has the fastest pace of deployments of offshore wind. So the complexity, though, is high. The complexity, the number of stakeholders that have to be involved in these kinds of deployments is really, really significant. It's not just a local community thing. It also becomes a state thing, a federal thing. It's across energy boundaries. It's across marine ecology boundaries. It's very complex. And in order to get it right, you really need all the stakeholders at the table. And that's what MOCEAN can do. We can really fill that gap. We can bring together the stakeholders across all those dimensions so they can co-create what we believe is the infrastructure you need going forward in the future that produces the clean energy we need, but also protects and enhances our marine ecologies, our marine industries, and also innovates whole new blue tech. So we think that by bringing together these kinds of stakeholders, we can actually drive nature inclusive designs. We can strengthen our understandings of the marine ecologies in ways that improve our data set collection through new sensors, through new algorithms for actually modeling that can also then create the data you need to really make data-driven policy decisions. And most important of all, by involving directly the coastal communities who are most impacted by these offshore wind developments, we can actually tap their wisdom, their expertise, their understanding, their lived experiences around these challenges, and have them help us co-create the innovative new blue technologies, the new fisheries, all the new industries that can take advantage of us getting this right. The time is now. I mean, the fact that we're at the beginning of our deployment, it makes it perfect for us to step in now, set the tone, set the pace, set the template and the models, because this is what's going to serve as the model for the rest of the deployments across the United States on both coasts, and it could serve as a new world model. And so for us, it's an opportunity not just for our region, not just for our country, but it also can help address the issues around US competitiveness worldwide around these technologies and these deployments. Next slide. So as many of you know on this call, there's all kinds of work that has been done to date around the research to indicate that you can actually do designs in the water that actually enhance the marine ecologies. You can click next one. This is a series of builds. Yeah, so clearly, as Dan mentioned earlier, you put structures in the water, you can actually foster growth. Next one. And clearly, you can actually create artificial reefs. There's work that's been done by people on this call and trying to create artificial reefs that actually help preserve things. Next. You can click through to the end on this one. Clearly, Europe understands this. That's why they're funding it. And I think people in the offshore wind industry now understand that there's an opportunity here, that if they want to deploy wind energy in the United States in particular, doing it in a nature-inclusive way, it works not only for them, but also for the benefit of the environment and for the support of the public for offshore wind. So it really becomes a win-win proposition for all. Now, having said that, as all of you on the call know, there's a lot of work to still be done. We're only at the tip of the iceberg of understanding all these issues, but we once again believe that MOCEAN can bring those resources to bear, and we can collectively then share those results to drive change with wind energy. Next slide. And it's clear that reef issues is something that's been well identified. We're losing them significantly, but the opportunity to help preserve those reefs and actually restore and grow them by making wise choices about what we put in the water is an opportunity for MOCEAN. Next slide, please. I saw Anne on this call from Inspire. I mean, this slide came from Inspire, but clearly there's an opportunity here as we put the wind infrastructure into place to actually make choices in materials, in geometries, and in the way we deploy it to actually enhance then the marine environment. Next slide, please. So our region is unique in the sense that we defined it around our common goals, needs, and opportunities, and not by our geography. It's interesting, today, all the wind deployments that are going on out there are really going project by project, state by state. And we may be missing an opportunity to really collectively think about how to do this. And that's what MOCEAN strives to do. So what defines our region is that we are all in this region deploying wind energy over the next 10 years as part of that $120 billion, 30 gigawatts. And more importantly, we all share the same challenges for doing that. We all share the same issues around trying to do it in a way that's optimal for long-term economic value. We also share the same challenges with developing our coastal communities, many of which sit in areas that the Economic Development Authority defines as being deprived. You'll notice that on this chart here, that if you look in the areas where the wind deployments are occurring, they are often adjacent to areas which are considered deprived. And so, for example, what's interesting to look on this chart is that many of these coastal areas are very close to metro regions which are considered innovation capitals of the world. So, for example, New Bedford is only 70 miles from Boston, but the contrast is stark. You would find in New Bedford that the population there, the average gross income is only 34,000. That's 2/3 of what it is for the state. And the unemployment rate is actually 40% higher than the rest of the state. John Mitchell, the mayor of New Bedford, describes the town as being a city of strong shoulders. But what he would like to see is New Bedford become a city of strong brains, indicating he wants to lift up the economy, not just by increasing jobs, but increasing the skill level of the jobs. And that creates then an opportunity for motion. If we put in these regions innovation incubators that bring together people with a local wisdom and understanding of those environments with researchers and technologists and entrepreneurs who want to help stir the pot and make good things happen, we can create the environment where they can identify and co-create those new blue economies and new ways of doing things that will not only improve the way in which we deploy the offshore wind energy, but also potentially create whole new economies, whole new blue tech economies. And that opportunity for us to do that will not only lift regions like New Bedford, but it creates a model then that we can share across the region and cookie cutter into other places. So the power of speaking with one voice as a region also gives us tremendous leverage with policy. As speaking with one voice that's data-driven, we can help influence wise choices in policy and deployments, in contract size, in contract design. And as many of you know, by looking at things in a longer-term economic cycle, for example, we may be able to influence the way in which the infrastructure that's put in place not only has a longer life to it, but also then is more nature inclusive. So for all these reasons, we actually selected these regions for our first conversion projects then to be those places where they already have some infrastructure or community support in place that we can very quickly move from the early
Sorry about that. Yep.
Early sizing phases to being able to then quickly in the third and fourth year of the engine grants be able to actually go to deployment. But that'll set the model up then for future conversion projects. So I think for us, we have an opportunity. By speaking with one voice driven by data, we can be more effective. And by leveraging our research and experiences across the region, we can lift all boats. We can create and help all new communities. And by working together, we can put in motion a brighter future. I couldn't resist the pun. So we'd love to get your feedback and comments on the summary. There's a more expansive form of it in the writing, but.
So thank you very much, Kevin. And I know there's someone who joined with an area code 401. I was trying to go through to see if I could mute because I think there's a little bit of background noise. I've not been monitoring the chat because I'm sharing my screen. Kevin, if you look at chat, you may see that there's some questions relevant. But while you're looking at that, we'd invite anyone who has a comment about the vision that they have seen expressed, whether or not this resonates with them. Where do you see that we're not going down the correct pathway? There's going to be multiple other opportunities as well for discussion. So we only put a couple or a few minutes in right now at this point. So if there was a short question or something you want to make a comment on until we continue, and then there's more time later for discussion, we'd be happy to take a couple minutes for that.
Yeah, Mike, no, thank you for the clarification. That definitely, yeah, we have to be careful that we're not overstating what we can do. I think the key message is really it's an opportunity for us to make sure we minimize and hopefully do things that enhance, but clearly we're not going to solve all issues.
Since we're not seeing other comments, just the way sometimes these events can go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on, recognizing that there'll be more to discuss once people have in fact actually seen more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about how we view the team and the approach to the structure of MOCEAN, which is what we've named our innovative engine. And so the theme of course, of what we're focused on is we want to have healthy oceans. We want to grow the blue economy, and we feel there's a huge opportunity to do this through nature inclusive offshore wind energy farms, because in our region, there's this likely $120 billion of investment in development costs over what will be the 10 years of the NSF support for this engine. To do these things, of course, you need to engage with a broad, different types of groups. And it's a particularly complicated area, which also very much aligns with the scope of what NSF is looking to advance, because you really need to bring industry to the table, be those offshore wind developers, blue tech startups, be those unions. And I know Chris Bashant, I think, is on the call from Carpenters Local 326 in Connecticut, for example. You need to have responsible bodies. So those can be regulators like BOEM, that could be like the DOER or DEEP down in Connecticut as it comes to looking at actually procuring and what do they actually consider. These are the groups that define lease lengths, define environmental requirements. We care, of course, about what the impact is on the stakeholder communities, because the reality is that if the environmental community and the people who make other use of the water, fisheries, and aquaculture, if things are not done that are a net positive benefit, then this industry is probably not going to go and grow to the scale that it really could, and which is very important to address climate change concerns. But as well, the scale of the investment is this huge new economic opportunity for addressing inequities in society, et cetera. So we need to have experts at the table in doing this, and the educational community as well, from K to Gray. And that includes outreach, like even what is happening in the New England Aquarium is one of the core partners as how do we engage people more broadly. This image here is the one that describes how we have structured things. So I'll give you a sense of what these three vertical lines are, and then we're going to talk about the individual aspects of them one after the other. So as mentioned, NSF, this is a 10-year funding, but the plan is when you get to the end 10 years, you have the relationships and other sources of investment that it can exist for decades to come. We have working group areas, and this is what we're really inviting those people on the call to, after this meeting, say, hey, we'd happily participate in a working group, and then we will send you information about what that's going to be about. We have four sort of characters of working groups. The top one here, nature inclusive offshore wind farms. A lot of this is more focused on the engineering aspects. What are the specific things we're putting in the water and for what purpose? Are they good structurally? Are they good from a standpoint of marine growth and habitats? For the ocean science, it's just trying to understand the ocean much better than we presently do in the impact of what we put there on, again, those marine growths and habitats. So there's an engineering aspect of it, and there's very much of a core marine science aspect of that. It's the blue economy, of course, blue tech, as well as how we're going to have shared use of these oceans in the future, and looking at what new types of opportunities will be. Climate is already changing a number of things for people in these communities. There's already conflicts between fisheries and aquaculture. We want to engage with people in those conversations, and we'll talk about the mechanisms for doing so that we can look at how we make net positive benefits for the environment and communities. And finally, education, outreach, and training. And so these are the different working groups that are going to be discussing, looking at various questions and making plans for the future. And that future primarily being what is done in years 3 through 10 of the engine and beyond. NSF is providing the monies for the first 2 years of the engine. And we have these 5 what we call convergent projects. What is a convergent project? It means it's not siloed in one particular area, but it's actually drawing from a number of different disciplines, areas of expertise, and different communities. And we're going to have one person from each of these groups describe what those are about, but do consider them to be these 2-year projects, multidisciplinary. You actually have deliverables coming from them. And then this is the engine infrastructure that the league organization is primarily responsible for, that knits everything together and does the support of the working groups as well as to the convergent projects. And how we're actually going to operate the working groups, we're not going to try and reinvent any wheels here. There are already great organizations that have done things such as bringing together the offshore wind industry, as well as the communities that are current users of the ocean space. They've been meeting for a long time. They've been developing helpful documents, and they have built these trusted relationships between communities and the industry. So people who are core partners of the team, like the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance, what they are going to do in their working groups that they already have is they're going to add to it some of the missions of what the engine is about. And so they will expand. There'll probably be some new committees, there might be some new memberships, but we're going to build from what already exists. Similar to that, and Nick, are you on the call?
I am.
Do you want to say a little bit about, because I think, the response, the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative has very similar but different as well, and in terms of what Rosa is doing. So if you would take a couple minutes to describe what RWSC does, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Napoli. I'm the Executive Director for the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. We are the co-host of the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for offshore wind and also host the Northeast Ocean Data Portal. And we've already got, as Dan said, we have an existing structure. Many of you on this call have established this group to have an existing structure where we can identify priorities for research, wildlife research related to offshore wind, and collaborate on implementing those priorities. And then, of course, use the Northeast Ocean Data Portal to disseminate data. So as you can see on the far right of the slide, that is the subcommittee and caucus structure that exists within RWSC. There's already groups meeting almost monthly to coordinate data collection and monitoring for wildlife science related to offshore wind. Many of these groups, it's a lot of the expertise within the region in terms of any one of these taxa. And of course, through the RWC is managed by the federal agencies, the states, the offshore wind industry, and the NGO caucus. So it's an existing structure that has been developed over the last several years just for this type of coordination around data collection.
Thank you very much, Nick. And as soon as we get through this description of the research team and this structure, we will have a period of time where we can ask questions. So questions, for example, about our RWSC and their mission, there's opportunity at that point. Mark, are you on the call?
Mark Huang.
Hey, Mark. So we have a slide describing some of the work that SEA-Head does on the screen. Would you like to provide an introduction to what SEA-Head's mission is and who you work with and the relevancy as you see it as it pertains to this engine? Because SEA-Head is one of our core partners. So please go ahead. You're muted at the moment. Okay, I think we lost connection there to Mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the next slide. And then if Mark, you join back on, then we'll return to this slide because I think it'd be nice to have it right from you.
Sorry,
there we are.
I'm back. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute. So SEA-Head, we established the first dedicated ocean incubator for startups called Blue Swell in partnership with the New England Aquarium. We're in our third cohort that is operating out of Cambridge. We're also in our pilot cohort for an accelerator, Blue Tech Accelerator with University of Southern Mississippi down in the Gulf Coast, also the first of its kind in that part of the country. If none of these startups have funding, it's all moot. It's still a relatively not well understood sector in the investment community. So we started the Blue Angels Group, which has done a lot of early stage investments until the Navy tells us we can't say Blue Angels anymore. That's what we call it. And we're also raising a fund so we can move faster and write some bigger checks to the companies that are scaling. And the big picture is we overlap with climate tech, circular economy, clean tech, life science, and food and ag, but the difference with all of our sister sustainability groups, so to speak, is that the ocean is not an afterthought. We take an ocean-centric approach and we go out, which makes our universe actually very large. We've even looked at, let's say, nitrates with data analytics out in the farming communities because it goes out to sea eventually. And lastly, I'd say the mission and the vision of See Ahead is that we need a bridge to what the STEM-based venture community to so-called go out to sea. And that's why we have the incubator and accelerator and the early stage investments. We think that's the real gap. Once we can strengthen that capacity building part of the so-called value chain, we'll see a lot more entrepreneurship tied to the ocean like you see in clean tech or food and ag or circular economy. Okay, Dan?
Perfect, Mark. And so See Ahead is going to co-convene the activities of Working Group 3 with E4All as well. I'm not sure if anybody from E4All is on the call. If so, it'd be nice to just say hello and say a word or two about your organization.
Howdy ho there, neighbors. It's Jeremiah Hernandez. I'm here with E4All. We're based in Lowell, Massachusetts. We have 12 sites throughout the US. And a few along our eastern seaboard, South Coast being one of them. We are accelerating economic and social impact through inclusive entrepreneurship. And we think we can be of value to this partnership in exposing underrepresented entrepreneurs to the work that we're all planning on making happen. So thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, I'm Jeremiah at e4all.org.
Thanks, Jeremiah. So that gives you an impression about how some of these working groups are going to operate and who's going to lead them and what sort of the scope is. In terms of so we're bringing together a large community, right? So you have different stakeholders, you have regulators, you have researchers, you probably have some people in Europe who have been working in a number of areas together. We said a core mission of the working groups is to plan what to do in years 3 to 10. So these working groups are really starting to think about, well, what are the big questions? Maybe not questions that we can answer with one little small research project, but what are the big questions that we need broad engagement for, and in some cases, significant new investments, some of which can come from NSF, but some might actually come through, for example, joint industry projects. And if you look at the European Horizons program, as well as other things in the area of the offshore wind industry, there has been an incredible number of extremely well-funded and very effective joint industry projects. So the working groups are going to think about and tackle some of these difficult questions. And I've put some examples here on this screen, right? So what should be the optimal design life of foundations? What public data is needed on properties? What monitoring strategies should we use? How well do we really understand the health of marine ecosystems? Number 5 there is something that there's a huge amount of debate on, in Europe and also in the United States. If you're putting things in the water, are you trying to maximize biodiversity? Are you just trying to reestablish what used to be there? And how do we actually know which is the more effective strategy, et cetera? So the working groups are going to identify questions, think about, prioritize them. What can we do in the short term, medium term, and long term? Where are the cases where we need joint industry projects, or to actually achieve this, we're going to have substantial public-private partnerships and other things come to be. So this gives you a flavor of what the working groups are about. And then I want to talk about what the engine infrastructure is that is connecting, that is supporting the working groups. It's supporting the convergent projects. And I'm going to start this by telling you why we call ourselves MOCEAN. So it's because our mission is the ocean. And so we very much like the particular term because it's pronounced like the word motion. And of course, in offshore wind farms, there is significant motion everywhere. So it's the wind, it's the blades, it's the fish, it's the boats, it's the workers. And it's also the conditions that change over time. Josh has a wonderful little video where he will be illustrating that. Because our benthic conditions, we're developing reefs, our water chemistry, stratifications, et cetera. All this changes as a function of time. And so it's this motion for wind energy development that is not something that is as dominant a concern as it is on onshore. So we figure it's a nice term and characterization. We also like the term because this is an NSF engines program. And so what is motion? Well, motion puts physical, human, financial resources in motion. And this is really the fuel for the engine that, in conjunction with NSF investments and from other communities, can really do something that drives this just energy transition and takes advantage of what the scale of the investment will be in this space. We're going to talk a little bit about our DEIA plan later on. Data models and tools are probably a little bit self-descriptive, but we are at a very nascent state when it comes to what we have collected in terms of the needed data to actually create the models or tune the models. There are intellectual property issues in the sense that even what is collected by wind energy developers, let's say, does not get completely shared. There's a lot of activities about that over the world, and it remains a significant challenge that we hope this engine can contribute to as well. And so if you have data and you're developing models, ultimately, if you're doing use-inspired innovation, it's about creating the types of tools that will be helpful to decision makers. And so this will be discussed as well, briefly mentioned in some of the convergent projects. What is societal cost of energy? I'll use a little graphic to illustrate this. And so when we think about what the actual cost is for getting electricity by a certain particular source, and these are dollars per, I should say euros per megawatt hour, the decisions usually right now are made entirely about what is the levelized cost of energy. That is the cost of design, construction, installation, operation, and decommissioning at the end, typically on a 25-year time horizon. But if you want to really consider and this is the dominant, what is used for selecting which developers, wind projects, et cetera. What you really want to do is you really want to consider other impacts. And so that pertains to what is the benefit on local employments? What is the benefit to the environment? And also what the potential costs are along that line. People have been talking about this for a while, but it's not really a very data-informed approach to SCOE. So UMass Dartmouth has been doing quite a bit of work in this space, and they are one of our core team members as well. But if you look at when we start to consider some of these other impacts, and I'll just focus on the one for offshore wind, and this is from a little bit while ago. So this was $95 a megawatt hour. When you actually look at what the various costs are for subsidies being received, which is not, this is European, so there's really at that stage of the game, they've exhausted them. There's a transmission cost, there's a variability cost that you need to consider, right? That's a storage effect. So you have a levelized cost, which considers the systems effects, but then you have some other things that you want to consider, such as what is the benefit to employment? And offshore wind is one of those areas, for example, where there's huge opportunities for benefits to employment. But there's a bunch of other things that are not obviously included here, but are things that we want to consider in our engine. Ultimately, if you have data models and tools, and we have an improved way of considering what all the various impacts are of the technology that we've selected to use to generate our electricity, such as jobs and environmental effects, then the policies and decision makers are in a better position to do things maybe a little bit differently than they did in the past. And so for an example, right now, as most states, key driving parameter is the levelized cost of energy. In the Netherlands, the chief driving parameter right now in the selection of a wind energy project is environmental impact. So, but you need the data in order to be comfortable doing that. We would love, for an example, for a decision, what would be one of the things we've been chatting a lot with the industry about is, hey, what would happen if suddenly BOEM said that the leases were for 60 years rather than 25 years? How would that change what we do? And the answer to that, well, it would change everything. But, is BOEM in a position to be able to do that? Is there enough knowledge data to really know whether or not that would be the right thing to do? No. So that's one of the things that the engine wants to support as well, to help people make other types of decisions when appropriate. So, and according to the schedule, we have about 7 minutes at this stage of the game to respond to questions and comments you may have. about the structure of how we've organized MOCEAN in terms of the functionality of the working groups. We're going to talk about the convergent projects next, but questions and comments about the working group as well as the engine infrastructure that we're providing would be most helpful. Through chat is also very helpful, so happy to listen to take a few minutes here and listen to some of your questions or comments. Or you can decide, we'll wait a little bit and learn a little bit more, and then we'll have all our questions at the end. We wanted to at least insert a couple of time blocks earlier on so that if there were particularly other types of questions, we could respond to them. Chris, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Appreciate the opportunity to hear all this. I had a question. Much earlier, you talked about how the overall structure of this NSF engine would be flexible. And I wanted to know what that meant. Did it mean flexible in terms of directions or projects or the overall scheme of things that are being done? But could it also mean that it could become even more inclusive? In other words, you find other partners, you find others that can be included. So I just wanted to get a feel for what that direction may be. Thanks.
Chris, terrific question. And NSF has actually, for this engines program, had a number of these various webinars, multi-hour webinars where people had the opportunity to ask questions. And there was a number of questions to them. What do you mean when you say it needs to be nimble and flexible? And the answer is that I don't think they really necessarily know. What they did use was they used the life sciences example from the National Science Foundation. And sorry about that. I was just, oh, I see. Sorry. Someone was just sending, Farah was just sending me a note, so I had to look at it for a sec. But anyhow, the state of Massachusetts invested over $1 billion in fostering the advancement of life sciences. And they actually had the person who leads that organization give a presentation to everybody who had submitted these NSF proposals. And when you look at what the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center did, it was doing everything under the sun. It was sponsoring schools, small little projects here and there. It was changing direction significantly as they learn. NSF looked at that model and said, man, this would really be just a fantastic thing for us to be able to do in these use-inspired research where we're trying to drive economic development. We know it's not like a traditional NSF center. A traditional NSF center is you have your core group of partners that essentially remains fixed. You develop this multi-year research strategy, and then you execute it according to that plan, modifying it as you learn, but it doesn't change all that much. What they wanted in this case is for you to be able to bring on a lot new partners, have joint industry projects, and do things that are not really like anything that NSF has funded in this space in the past. Yes, NSF has done these small SBIR grants, et cetera, but nothing of this type of grandiose scale. One of the questions and concerns that was raised to NSF is, because of federal requirements, are you really set up to be able to have an organization be this nimble and still compliant with the various types of federal requirements? So I think NSF knows what they want to achieve. They know they want it to be nimble and flexible, but they don't know what that means. And so it's to us to do what we think is the best in terms of creating that level of nimbleness. And at the very end of the slide deck, I am going to talk about the sustainability of the center and our vision for a spin-up organization that starts as the same year as the NSF supported engine, that is able to attract and manage other types of joint funding and interests in order to achieve the level of flexibility that we think is suitable for the nature of the industry and what MOCEAN is trying to accomplish. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. It's really great. Sounds a little bit more entrepreneurial than just stagnant, so appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's new. It's very new space. Farah, are you back on? I know I saw your note. Okay.
I'm here. I got it. at least for a minute. So
At least for a minute. So while you're on, let's go ahead. And so we're going to move to the next topic in the conversation. It's the same slide to start off with. And so Farah, please pick it up from here.
okay, thanks, Dan. I'm going to talk a little bit about use-inspired research and basically what we're going to be doing and for the first couple of years. And these research projects are going to be the fuel for the discussion, tangible fuel for the discussion within the working groups, and a way to get the engine up and running very quickly. So this suite of projects was developed to test drive all the multiple overall concepts of the engine. And so collectively, they're designed to do a couple of things. Create touch points for applied research throughout the region. So to start creating that regional identity and connectivity, and doing so in specific locations and in partnership with specific industrial sectors that are targeted for positive economic impact within the engine. They're designed to develop baseline information at both the micro scale in terms of what's happening in with these new structures in the ocean in order to inform how we can channel that, better channel that the development of new ecosystems, new reefs in directions that we find beneficial. And to prototype and to do that at the micro scale, but also at the macro scale, looking at big data and looking at these individual structures collectively. And this is one thing that we feel that the engine is really poised to make a great contribution to the industry, since currently we need to look at projects only project by project through a regulatory process. Now that we're at scale, looking at those larger interactions and looking at this infrastructure system in that context is really important. We have projects that are starting, a project that's starting to look at in that dimension. And also to prototype economic development, innovative economic development, partnership and outreach strategies within communities. So we're going to be hearing about these discrete projects in a minute, but it's important to remember that through this overall structure of the engine, these projects will be feeding each other, they'll be interacting, and they'll be identifying synergies and crosstalk information through this structure in order to inform, as everyone said, the subsequent years of the engine. So with that, I'll turn it over to Colleen, who is managing the first Convergent project.
Great. Thank you, Farah. Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Hansel. I'm a senior scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And I'll be speaking for the CP1 team. So Kevin already gave a really nice introduction to nature inclusive design, what the benefits are, what the needs are to effectively enable this within offshore wind. So in this 2-year Convergent project, what we want to do, and the goal is to begin narrowing down what type of material modifications can we do to optimize this approach, as well as begin just laying the foundation for being able to bring in parallel ecosystem services such as seaweed aquaculture. So we're going to start off by doing small scale deployments that will ultimately be upscaled for testing in the emergent phase. So, some of the first order questions that we have are, what are the chemical and biological modifications that should be done to increase both the recruitment and the growth of target benthic species? What are corrosion protection systems have the dual benefit of impeding corrosion as well as providing an optimal benthic community? And then what kind of physical modifications can be done to the structures to increase ecosystem diversity while also increasing design life? And so some ideas of what those questions are and what they look like are in the illustrations in images on the right hand side. But I want to focus in right now on our objectives, which are, we have 3 dominant objectives for this first project in the first 2 years. So one is, we need to identify optimal materials, corrosion control, geometric modifications, and deployment approaches that we want to use for the small scale testing, incorporating this nature inclusive design. So to do this, what we really want to do is benefit from what's already known. We want to hold a workshop in that first quarter, bringing in all the working groups, bringing in outside partners, and really, not reinventing the wheel, but learning from what we already know, and then looking to advance that. So that'll be the starting point. From what comes out of that workshop and those discussions, we want to then construct and deploy materials, increasing in complexity throughout the 2 years, that will begin to test some of these chemical, biological, and material modifications. And so, for instance, we want to test an array of chemical compositions within concrete and steel, as well as surface coatings that will increase recruitment, target species. We want to seed those materials with target species, and so on. Later on in the 2-year project, we want to then bring in some physical modifications using nature inclusive design strategies in the geometric design, in small prototypes that we will put out within the field in deployments throughout later in that 2nd year. And then overall, throughout that the 2 years, we will continually be monitoring these structures, trying to learn from how these modifications are impacting the benthic communities, the diversity, the growth, the local biogeochemistry, as well as just ecosystem productivity. We'll be using both available in situ sensors and sensing technologies and platforms that we can put out, as well as keeping an eye on what types of other sensing needs do we have in the future for monitoring and for identifying key parameters for feeding into models. And then all the while, we'll also be monitoring the structures for corrosion and biodeterioration. So I think my 3 minutes is probably up. So I'm happy to take any questions at some point.
Thank you ever so much, Colleen.
Oh, you got it, Dan. All right.
Yeah. So next project is about nature inclusive concrete gravity-based foundations. About 75% of installations right now are large steel monopiles. Some people have concerns about those for a variety of reasons. One is that you typically drive them, and the noise associated with the driving can have not a great effect on habitats. People are working at new technologies to actually reduce that, which is fantastic. Concrete has an advantage for if you use concrete gravity base, you float it out and sink it, so you avoid the noise. The elements that though we're going to focus on in this project is really looking at and why we care about concrete is the increased durability that is provided by it. What type of effect can it have on local jobs? And we recently did a report on this. We want to explore concrete solutions because they're a little bit easier, let's say, to future-proof. And what I mean by that is when you have a concrete foundation, the cost increase potentially to build this so that it can take a 20 megawatt turbine down the line, if it starts with life with a 15 megawatt turbine, is not necessarily all of that large relative to other foundation solution options. So we can start to think about much longer design lives with, I think, in a more economic way with the use of concrete than with the use of some other structures which deteriorate more rapidly and are more sensitive to fatigue and other issues. Another thing we like about concrete that we want to explore is since you can play with the mineral characterization and the surface condition of concrete very effectively, that gives opportunities for some to better tailor it for marine growth, and then that leads to certain habitats. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at comparing designs for concrete and steel structures for different mid-ocean conditions, different locations. We're going to look at geophysical and geotechnical issues, address bearing and lateral load capacities. We'll have to understand the mid-ocean conditions for doing this work, and we're going to do optimization for the concrete, and then we're going to do a lot of comparisons now of the costs and benefits of concrete versus the steel monopile structures as it pertains to cost differential, considering life cycle costs and the possibility of these much longer design lives. And so that's what we're primarily going to do. We know that one of the things this is going to lead to, if we're thinking about concrete gravity-based structures actually providing a significant component of the foundation systems, is for that to be possible, because there's other challenges in terms of length of time to construction. We don't have necessarily the fabrication yards. Sometimes there are dredging issues. So we're going to have to identify the policies, the incentives, the investments, public-private partnerships are in fact actually needed to drive this forward. So we've been working with groups who very much care and want to pursue this solution. I'll show this one image down here. So my PhD was on concrete gravity-based oil and gas structures. So I had the opportunity to be out in the field during construction of these structures, for which like the first year of inspection is 30 years down the line. Because you can really, if you do it properly, make concrete structures to last a very long time. Aaron or Chris, would you like to just say something for a minute about some of the geotechnical items that one cares about when they're thinking about the use of concrete gravity bases?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. This is Aaron Bradshaw. I'm a geotechnical engineering professor at the University of Rhode Island, both in the civil engineering and ocean engineering departments. And my colleague, Chris Baxter, who's also on the call, really are going to provide a supporting role in the geotechnical engineering of to help support Dan and his team with the development of these GBS concepts. So with regard to GBS, there are things, it's important to look at things like stability of the soil as well as deformation of the soil, because those will actually influence the geometry or the configuration of the actual, or the size of the actual platform. So what we hope to do is to do some analysis, not geotechnical analysis, not only to support the installation. So you have to think about what are the things you have to think about the soil when you install it, as well as when it's in service, what are the issues, stability and deformation that you have to think about when it's actually operating. So we're gonna sort of provide that analysis to provide really realistic constraints for Dan and his team, so that they can design and look at realistic sizes and things for the gravity-based structure.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. My name's Josh Kohut. I'm at Rutgers University and very excited to bring with you or introduce to you the ideas behind this third convergent project, which we're calling the New Blue Fisheries Economy. The term New Blue Economy has been thrown around, and a lot of people may have different definitions. The definition that we're going to use as we develop this idea is that it's an economy centered on the utilization of new large data sets and models. So these data sets are expanding. We all know in different parts of the mid-ocean space, but also the fisheries, the ecology, the economy. All of these different data sets can be better utilized with some innovation and applying research to make sure that that data can actually be drilled down to inform policy and decision making. So how do we go from information to decisions? And the focus here is to help use that data to help transition the fisheries communities in the region to a productive and sustained coexistence with planned offshore wind. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to leverage existing ecological fisheries data sets and coexistent oceanographic and atmospheric models to co-develop with those stakeholders dynamic fisheries habitat projections. And those projections are focused on supporting, as I said earlier, the transition of a new blue fisheries economy, which we're arguing is a way for those fisheries to sustainably coexist with offshore wind. The map and diagram on the upper right kind of shows where we can take all of these different data sets, combine them, and if we do it in an innovative way, we can develop these dynamic habitat models. We're going to do something a little differently here, I think, than has been done in the past, is that we are engaging other communities, including the industrial engineering and artificial intelligence community. So can we build artificial intelligence frameworks that will allow us to more effectively merge these different data and models to build tools that are specific to a need? And so that's our general plan with this convergent project. Objective 3 shows that in the first 2 years, we're going to focus that effort on 2 main products. The first is recognizing that there will be shellfish fishing displacement. That displacement can be mitigated and has already been suggested, and there are discussions on mitigating that by potentially making other similar habitats productive and become fishing targets for those different fisheries. And so we'll use these dynamic tools to identify potential suitable locations for that. And then the second topic will be looking at dynamic finfish habitat. We're going to focus on squid because they're short-lived. We're also going to incorporate the actual wind farms in those models so we can understand the impact of wind farms on those dynamic models. And I show an example of one model there that's moving around. We recognize that the ocean moves. Fish have fins, so they move. And we can actually utilize all these data sets to build tools that capture that and capture it in a way that decision makers can actually use it.
Josh, thank you ever so much. So over to you, Annie.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Annie Murphy. I'm at Inspire Environmental, and I'll be talking about Convergent Project 4, which Inspire, myself, and others here are collaborating with several researchers at Hampton University, Deirdre Gibson and Joey Riesly, as well as Jeanette Davis, and SIA head, so Mark Wong. And our project is really, there's sort of three prongs that kind of align with the entire NSF engine, where we're interested in looking at who's growing on the monopiles and what is structuring that growth. So what's structuring and controlling, or what are the factors that are really important in understanding who's there and what they're doing, because we know that the organisms that colonize these structures are, really important in the ecosystem and the ecology of the system. So understanding who's there, and then that's sort of objective one, fundamental ecology questions. And this project is really going to be based at CVAL, where the two research monopiles are already built. Objective two will be exploring emerging technologies that may be used to monitor shifts in the benthic community that are living there. So we'll be exploring eDNA, as well as the use of stereo imagery and the data we can obtain from that imagery and other emerging technologies. And finally, I'll turn it over to Jeanette to talk about objective 3. Jeanette, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm Jeanette Davis. I am an adjunct professor at Hampton University and founder of Sciences Everywhere LLC, which is essentially created for safe spaces for people of color and marginalized groups to explore science. And so for objective 3, I heard a lot of you talk about inclusive projects, and we know that in order for projects to be inclusive, that's really making sure that people feel included. And so objective 3 really is around inclusivity of students and creating training and workshop opportunities for them, as well as host organizations. And so we really want to take time to develop tailored workshops that specifically focuses on DEIJ, not only for the students, but again, for the host organization, so that we ensure that students are going into welcoming environments that foster DEIJ. And with that, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. And what we'll do is we got a few more slides, and then we're going to actually have a good chunk of time for some questions and discussion. We know a number of them have come up in the chat, which are absolutely terrific, and we'll have a little bit of time in just a bit to get to that. So over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Dan. The idea of Convergent Project 5 is a lot of overlap and the pilot testing for the education outreach training group. We're collaborating with New England Aquarium, Bristol Community College, and a whole host of existing educational networks across the region and the nation. We are aiming at 2 future offshore wind ports, New Bedford and Salem, as these pilot projects in the first 2 years. And we would like to scale that across the region at other coastal communities, offshore port impacted communities through years 3 through 10. But we're again piloting these things in a real way with community so that we can scale up in the outer years. Task 1 is using outreach strategies and doing an aquarium with their expertise in exhibits, interactive websites, social media, to engage and expose a very diverse public audience through all of these activities for engaging people in seeing that nature inclusive offshore wind is a good thing. Finding support, engaging, finding that their careers and interest in this area. One of the very practical things we're going to do is form 3 hands-on educational activities, co-develop them with teachers, implement, test them, and disseminate them. We have a great deal of experience through COSI, Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence, funded by NSF. The best of hands-on activity has been distributed to 10,000 oceanographers across the world over the last project there. Some examples of this very use-inspired nature inclusive offshore wind. How do we design an ocean bottom structure to support biodiversity? And this could be at the elementary level. It can be also altered to be at the college level or public hands-on experience type thing. Measuring energy produced by scaled models of an offshore wind turbine. They can see it, they can test it, they can measure things. And mapping a diverse coastal community, get support and benefit offshore wind. So what is the impacts on a spatial sort of context? So just 3 examples, but we have to co-develop these with educators. We are going to work with the port communities with their youth to do needs assessment, project job growth, and map educational training programs, and then have that report and those results shared with the community and government leaders as, again, a model of it's really hard to say no to your youth, and youth are not as constrained as adults. We have a lot of experience actually with this in environmental areas. People listen to the youth actually more than they do to the adults. We want to listen to the community. And so a community advisory council made up of those youth and some teachers, formal and informal educators, and community organizations, that we can listen carefully to when we need what they want. So as we develop the research questions, as we develop the educational programs, we are engaging the community at the very beginning. So Kathy Yoon, are you on? Do you have anything to add to this one?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Bob. Sorry. And hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Yoon Khalil. I am the Vice President of Conservation Learning at the New England Aquarium. And we're really excited to partner on this project. This reflects a lot of our current direction and strategic priorities, including youth development and a focus on teens and young adults in climate and ocean issues. So the community needs assessment is something that lies very firmly within our guiding principles and strategic priorities for exactly the reasons Bob said, that we don't want to move forward with any of this work without first hearing from the users and end groups, as we're doing so much of here in the broader scope of this project. So suffice to say that we're very interested in seeing how this can integrate with other work that we're doing at the aquarium, so that it's not a standalone project, but instead integrated and woven into the broader scheme of our learning framework, which would benefit not only the project and the aquarium, but also all of the users involved.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Next slide, Dan. I'll mention that UMass Boston is a minority serving institution and has been rated the 3rd most diverse student population in the country. We're very excited about a win-win-win solution in the workforce development area. We think that the nature inclusive design with offshore wind energy solves these problems. If we do it right, we can increase or enhance marine ecosystems. We can increase and enhance the communities, better air quality in these coastal communities, better public services, job opportunities within and staying within the community, and clean energy transition. Here's a table that Dan put together thinking about what is the benefit of 1 per gigawatt of energy. So something like 67 turbines, if you have a particular cost per kilowatt hour, it generates something like $0.39 billion, which if you take a nice salary and benefits, 150K, creates something like 2,500 jobs. And so if you scale up to what the engine is looking at, 30 gigawatts, that's something like 78,000 jobs. And those are direct jobs paid for by the energy. So we think of a ×3 multiplier if we think about supply chain and supportive services and community impacts and sort of all that. Biden's thinking about 110 gigawatts by 2050 over the next 30 years. That's 300,000 jobs, and ×3 is close to 1 million jobs. If you think that's crazy, Netherlands is aiming at 70 gigawatts. So why is the US just slightly sort of higher? And if we fill up a 15% demand of energy, 300 gigawatts, that's 750K job in just very high paying jobs within the direct field, and the indirect is again a multiplier. The workforce development challenges and opportunities are very exciting and also challenging. New educational programs, hybrid, remote, low barrier, engaging, micro-credentialing, et cetera, at high school level, community college level, university level, co-generated with industry to be nimble and serving the workforce development as well as the industry in a whole host of different kinds of jobs, as you can see here. We know that this is a complex system, and transdisciplinary system level thinkers are needed and will be built into the curriculum and the programs and the introduction, sort of all that stuff. And as you saw from the introductory materials, and this new blue economy about a new fishing and aquaculture practices and the way that we do things, and the co-location with offshore wind, I think produces a lot of very exciting educational practices across the world. And all of this will be a pilot, sort of piloting in the first 2 years to feed that education outreach and training workshop. We set the scale, and we scale across the region as well as the country. So I turn it back to, for Carrie for the diversity, equity, and inclusion slide. Carrie, are you there?
I am. Thanks so much, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Carrie Wilkins Yell here. I'm a faculty member at UMass Boston and the Director of Radical Investment and Strategic Solutions towards Equity, RISE Consulting LLC. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our model here that we are taking as part of the MOCEAN engine. I'll talk about the image on the right first, and then I'll talk about the text on the left. So as you've heard, as we talked through the presentation thus far, there's really this synergistic relationship right at the core between MOCEAN and the communities that we're engaged in, right? The communities that we're embedded in. Kevin talked earlier about being really, really immersed in New Bedford, thinking about communities that have historically been economically marginalized, disenfranchised. How are we doing use-informed science, use-inspired science that is informed by these communities, right? We're listening to these communities, and then in turn, we're disseminating our findings, really ensuring that the work that we're doing goes back into these communities so that then they can, work towards advancement. So really thinking about this bi-directional reciprocal, that's at the core of what's taking place with MOCEAN, listening to and being connected with our communities. Off to the left, right? Really thinking about how MOCEAN, through workshops, through training, are increasing the equity-focused mindset of our stakeholders and our partners, right? When we think about, embodiment, equity-focused mindset throughout the partners and the stakeholders, that's in turn going to benefit the communities that we're engaged in, right? We can take a more culturally responsive approach. We're listening to, we're working alongside, working with communities versus extracting, right? And not necessarily returning our findings back to these communities. So I think there is this cultural responsiveness, this equity-focused mindset that in turn influences our workforce development. So you've heard Jeanette speak, you've heard Bob talk about really working with K through 12, working with university level students, really ensuring that we're increasing access. Our pipeline of ocean scientists and marine scientists will consistently look the way it currently looks if we're not thinking strategically about the communities that we're investing in and ensuring that we're improving inclusion and access, right? Making sure that we're broadening participation of a diverse workforce through ocean science. And when we do that, right, those individuals then go back to their communities and incorporate transformative and innovative contributions in communities that have been historically underserved. So if we're taking this kind of a framework, right, this multi-pronged framework, of engaging the community, centering communities that have been historically underserved, we really ensure then that we're advancing offshore wind, ensuring that we're advancing ocean science, and the next generation looks quite differently than it does currently. So how are we going to do this? Throughout the model, we have multiple partners, as you've heard discussed, and we're taking a distributed model, right? So instead of this one person being the spokesperson of DEIJ across our 50 partners, we're thinking that our multiple partners have individuals who are doing this work on the ground already. And so let's listen, let's leverage, let's really, expand those partnerships and what's currently being done. So it's going to be integrated throughout the engine, from the leadership, the decision-making processes, all the way throughout. We'll have our multiple partners where we're ensuring that we're meeting regularly, and the strategies that we're coming up with that center equity inform the working groups, inform the convergent partners. So really making sure that DEIJ is dispersed throughout the engine model. Right? We're adopting and advancing promising practices, folks, right? When we know that things are working, let's expand it, let's scale it up, let's support it, and let's ensure that now it's being utilized throughout the engine. And of course, right, we're doing this work when we're centering SMART, right? Objectives of strategic, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we're going when we're thinking about the DEIJ work and its connection, especially to workforce development.
Carrie, Bob, everybody else, thank you ever so much for those really great presentations. And we're sort of primarily going to switch into a discussion mode. I think I have one other slide that we want to make sure that we definitely show before we finish today. But before having a discussion on what you've just heard in the convergent projects, et cetera, I want to share a tool. And so let me see here. I got to get to chat. There it is there. So we'll share this afterwards, but what it is we've created something for people to use in order to be able to provide us comments. And so, hey, people are already using the Jamboard. That's fantastic. Cheryl, so maybe I can describe it, and Cheryl, please correct me when I make mistakes. So we're going to leave this thing open for a week, just for you folks to go through and identify what you see as things that are good, bad, areas of improvement, et cetera. And so there's several different boards that you can simply toggle through if you go to that link. And the way you do it is when you're on a page, if you got something you want to add, you go over here, you grab yourself a sticky note. There's a index down here. If you're academia, industry, government, or other, grab the associated color, whatever you happen to be. I'm academia, so I will grab green. And what convergent projects would be useful to consider, right? You can go through and add something to it. So that's the process for actually going through and using the mechanism, and we'll provide some instructions after this as well. We're going to field a couple of questions now that have come up, and then we're going to, the team is going to stay on at 11:30 to be able to continue this. So Farah has pointed me out that there was a question about concrete gravity bases and what about the cement? Because isn't cement a really bad thing, or isn't concrete a really bad thing? Absolutely. It's 6 to 8% of the global CO2 emissions are from cement. We manufacture 4.4 billion tons of cement every year. About half of that is produced in China. That's why their footprint is so large. But the amount of cement we actually use in these concrete gravity bases is very small. The way that the industry looks at CO2 footprint of generating electricity from different sources is that's expressed as grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt of generated electricity. For a concrete gravity base, it would contribute 1 gram per kilowatt hour. If you're generating electricity from coal, it's 820. If it's from gas, it averages around 490. Overall, for onshore wind and offshore wind, it's typically around the order of 12 or so grams per kilowatt hour. That's why when you go from coal generating electricity to using wind or solar to generate electricity, you end up, that's why we make our huge CO2 savings. So of that 12 grams or so for offshore wind, you have about a gram of it that would be related to the cement. So yes, cement is an enormous problem globally, but from the amount we use is so small that it's negligible relative to the savings if concrete enables us to do some things that otherwise are benefit to the economy, longevity of our wind farms, et cetera. So I've answered that question. And Farah, do you want to flag and take another one? I think we have maybe 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then I'll move to some closure and discussion of next steps.
Okay, great. Just let me know when it's time for the last question. We have a good one here for convergent project number 3. Can considerations be included of using wind farms as marine reserves as part of CP3? Do we still have Josh here?
Yeah, I'm here. So our thought process with CP3 is that by building this framework for using the data and the AI to bring all this together and build tools, that there's opportunity for future tool development as the engine progresses through the 10-year time frame. And what we had to do was come up with what we felt was 2 things that we could do in the first 2 years to demonstrate the utility of this approach and have some early success. And so the 2 focus areas initially are only intended for those first 2 years. So, you know, in answer to the question, there's certainly opportunity to use this approach and framework, and certainly the partnerships that'll be developed by the engine to do other product development as the engine progresses from years 3 to 8 or 3 to 10.
Okay, let's see. Another question, is there a place to see the objectives for each convergent project group, their hypotheses and their metrics for success?
And so, Farah, were you going to ask someone to field that question?
Well, I wanted to see if there's anyone that wanted to jump in, but I would say that there will be some detail within the proposal, but that those refinements will be developed once the project once we're actually getting ready to launch the project. That's my understanding. Anybody else have a comment on that?
Everything you saw on the slides will be in that draft proposal. The metrics are being included in an evaluation plan, which will also be part of that proposal. So some detail, but not all of the detail.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's hard in the constraints that NSF puts on any proposal and page to put all the details, but our intention with CP3 is that when we do that co-development process, if funded, we would be able to define those metrics.
Thanks. I'm looking for additional questions. I see a lot of great comments. If anyone has a question that's come to top of mind, feel free to call it out as I look through the chat.
And Farah, maybe I'll say one thing and then we'll go to the next slide. But Jamie, if you're on, can you comment whether or not actually one can design things very explicitly to try and develop certain types of marine growth and habitats if you're on the call? Be interesting to learn from your experience if you're on still.
Yeah, hey Dan. So from our experience, so we come from like a very engineering background. Let me just preface this by saying that. We're a marine construction company, and we have a very strong engineering background, and we have a strong marine bio group and environmental group within our organization. And for our nature inclusive design elements and for our habitat development elements that we've designed, produced and installed so far, what we see is that we have an increasing level of success at being able to design for particular species or types of habitats. It's never perfect, but it's a bit of trial and error. And we're also gaining understanding in how the material influences this for particular types of marine environments, and how certain environments are just much more tolerant of particular material substrates, and others are, and they're more focused on basically three-dimensionality, like certain macro and microstructures. And that's different for other environments where the substrate is incredibly important in what you put in there. So we're having some good successes and a lot of learning over the last basically like 10 years with this, and our pilot projects that we've had now between Europe and the Americas mostly, and a little bit in Asia.
Jamie, thank you ever so much. And one of the words you use, I really like learning. We have to find mechanisms in order to learn. And if when you talk to Europeans who have been working in this space, and since you're from Boskalis, right? So Boskalis has been involved in the offshore industry a long time and has a very large market share. But people regret that they haven't done the types of things that actually allow us to learn, right? And that's data model tools. And so much about the way this engine has been structured is how do we maximize the learning we can do? Because we got to put these things out. We got to try, we got to see what happens. Because until we do that and we demonstrate it, we can't do nature inclusive design at the scale and with the level of reliability that we want to be able to. That would be possible if we're able to advance and test. So that is a key function of the engine. So this will be my last slide. One of the things that NSF talks about a great deal in these engines programs is they don't want to launch something and it dies right away. So I was involved in 2 previous NSF centers, which pretty much closed door the day after the funding stopped. But this is a very different environment that we are looking here. We're seeing and expecting exponential growth in this industry over decades to come. The need is there for addressing climate change, and the opportunity for transforming communities, et cetera, in a very positive way and through new opportunities is tremendous. I put this on the screen as one example of the money that is in the system. And so in the recent auction, well, somewhat recent auction, I guess at this stage of the game in New York, where they auctioned off an area of the seabed, which is about 25 by 25 miles if you add it all together. The summation of the bids just to have that lease area to be able to develop in the future. You don't have a project, no agreement, but just the right to be able to use that space for, let's say, 25 years of operation after a project is awarded. The industry paid $4.37 billion just for the opportunity to have a little bit of the seabed for doing this. There's these names of these companies. You don't know, well, who are these really? They're mostly international oil and gas companies. So it's, it's what used to be Statoil, now Equinor, it's British Petroleum, it's Total, it's Shell, it's a lot of the big players. The very last, most of them are European. This very last group here is one of the new US developers onto the scene. The other one is Dominion down in Virginia related to the project that Annie spoke about. So our view, and sort of as a little bit of a closing comment, even though the rest of us are going to stay on just to continue to respond to questions for as long as people want to look at this, we see there's lots of opportunities to do the types of things that we think really needed to be done in the engine. And one of the terms we used a lot in the last little bit is this term responsibility. So the industry, they're fighting in very competitive process to, in fact, actually be able to deliver projects on time. They can't advance nature inclusive design approaches with all these other benefits all by themselves. Our responsible bodies, such as, those who engage in procuring or managing and regulating offshore wind energy, we're still new to this game, right? We got 7 turbines in the water, as Kevin mentioned. They can't do it by themselves. But as that big oval ring I showed much earlier on, it actually takes an entire community to be able to think about and do this right. And so we believe that we've assembled through our 18 partner institutions on this proposal. And if we're successful, we hope that the people that will be brought into that with that brings already established relationships such as Rosa and RWSC and others already have, we can take a responsibility for thinking about what are the best things to be doing in this space for benefiting society. So, we think we are doing a lot of things here, which is really very much aligned with exactly what the NSF program is about. They may or may not see it that way. The NSF process is all very interesting and subject to what an individual reviewer sees and what questions they raise. I've been in a lot of panels. But we would like to think that MOCEAN, this entity that we've created in these relationships, that if we're not successful with the NSF engine in this round, that we will find mechanisms to be able to make significant advancement so that we can have responsible large-scale offshore wind energy that brings the types of benefits that we recognize our nation very much needs. So that's sort of the conclusion of things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you want to see everybody, you can go up to the top right-hand corner and go into gallery view. That's often very helpful. And the team is going to stay on. We're going to provide, you have the link to Jamboard. We really appreciate you using Jamboard. We're going to share the proposal. Very much appreciate your comments, fairly high level. We'll provide some instructions. There will be office hours at a few times next week. So if people have additional questions and comments, we look forward to receiving them from you. So now's the time for sort of open discussion. We can use hand raising as maybe a first way to kick this off, and we'll see how long people want to go for. So when I see a hand, I'll call on you. So I'm not seeing any hands. Who can ask? Who's gonna?
Hey,
hey, Jamie, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to ask some questions. Sorry, I couldn't find the hand in Zoom. I'm pretty Zoom incompetent, Teams professional. Yeah, so I was interested. So basically there's like this initial two-year element, and then it continues thereafter. And looking at a lot of the initiatives and also thinking about what you were stressing, that the intention of NSF is to create something that has a strong enough foundation and impact that becomes rooted and grows thereafter. It becomes sustaining, in essence, self-sustaining, self-growing. And so I was thinking about, Josh, about your comment on the model development and the tool development. And I was wondering if it's part of the more grander intentions that, like, to use this initial 2 years for a lot of like the concept and the tool developments, like initial piloting on a smaller scale. I think, Colleen, this goes also with like what you're talking about with materials and elements, but then really focusing on or having a key element of like that next 2 years where it's really about the application stage. Like, so there's like a possibility over the course of like this whole program to actually have those iterative cycles where you go through like concept development, implementation, or like testing, application, learning, because it's not going to be perfect, or it might even completely fail, redesign or redevelop, recalibrate, whatever it may be, test. Like keep going to like have a few of those cycles, so you kind of like you end up like reaching all of your stakeholders along that pathway. So I was just kind of wondering about your thoughts and the thoughts of the various team leaders about how they see that to like get that embedment and that application and testing component.
Yeah, I could say I think it's a really good thought there, Jamie, and our approach, as I mentioned, was to say the innovation here is bringing together communities that haven't been brought together. There are those that are familiar in the data, those are familiar in the fishery, those that are familiar with AI and some other these data tools that can be used, but they haven't talked much in the past. We've been trying to do it sort of ad hoc, I think, as a community. And so this opportunity allows us to be much more rigorous, get the right people together from communities that haven't talked before. And when thinking about how we could demonstrate the utility of that approach and the data that's out there and the tools, we thought focusing on shellfish would be a really good place to start for two reasons. One, it's a fishery that will be impacted by offshore wind development. Two, they don't have fins, and so they don't move. And so it's a fishery, when we think about dynamics, we're at least removing one of the motions, or at least part of one of the motions, by focusing on that. And there's already been a very active and engaged discussion among the shellfish community on ways to mitigate. That includes potentially seeding populations in other part of the region that's not targeted for offshore wind development as a way to transition the fishery to a new location. And so that was something that we felt we could demonstrate a success in 2 years, or at least evaluate whether it's successful or not in 2 years. And then the finfish is taking advantage of all the great work that many on this team have done and others outside of this team have done, and looking at a short-lived species again as a demonstration, because we expect them to be more maybe responsive to local and modern ocean conditions. And that may not get to completion, but at least we can start that development process. And as you mentioned, some of these other ideas that could come in, that's something that can happen in the out years of the project. But we wanted to have those early successes to show that this is something that could be useful.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you very much, Josh. And we're going to go to Dan O'Connell next. But just before Dan's question, I wanted to respond to a question that you raised, Jamie, in terms of how we thinking of this thing growing over time. So there's the NSF funding, and 160 million over 10 years is actually really modest relative to all the challenges that face us. And, right now the money sort of flows through the lead organization, which is Tufts. And we actually want to, and what we are going to do on day one is we spin up a parallel organization, which is regional, for where the wind energy is going to be developed, most especially over the next 10 years or so. And we'd really like that to have no address other than being in the region where it is occurring, because the individual states and industry, I think there is significant interest in actually investing in things like joint industry projects, et cetera. So the NSF money is sort of one pot, and it's going to do a certain number of things, but then we're going to have this other spin up entity, MOCEAN, right? So that's going to be the name of this nonprofit. What it will do is it will leverage and provide a lot of that other type of flexibility that ultimately NSF may not be able to actually create because of requirements on top of them in terms of compliance, et cetera. So that is our way that we stay true to NSF. We allow the experts to sort of lead initially how this thing gets all kicked off, but at the same time, we're able to grow it. So we have these other mechanisms for regional engagement on this. So great question, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, this is Dan O'Connell. I'm a geotechnical engineer with BOEM. I know quite a few of you and worked with a lot of you already. Now I've been with BOEM 10 years now, and I've seen, going back way back to the Cape Wind days. So I've seen how things have really changed, and this level of interest did not exist 10 years ago. And there's so much more interest in people getting more involved. And I think it's great. And everything that was talked about today, affects BOEM in one way or another, from the environmental group, the policy group. The one thing I could see though is that, the way things stand right now, we have to follow the regulations as written. And it's basically, we have to protect the environment. Our mission is not to improve the environment. Of course, you can interpret it, protect the environment. That's, it's kind of a subjective term, but, and the developers are focused on the profitability. These are commercial projects, they're bidding, that's why LCOE is so critical, because that's what they're bidding, and they can't build a project. They can get all the permits they want, but if they don't have a contract to sell the electricity, they can't build a project. And so if we're going to look at social goals and other issues, I think eventually it's going to require some change in legislation, either with the states, the way utility organizations operate, because right now there's no incentive to do some of these ideas. We see it all the time that all these options for gravity-based and other options to improve, but unless there's a requirement or a financial incentive to do that, developers are not going to do that. And so I think that's the challenge. I mean, at BOEM, there was a lot of frustration having to follow the regulations as written. We're going to come out with some rule changes next year. It's been taking 10 years to do them. So, but I think it's great to start thinking about the future, because things are really changing right now. We're kind of right at the beginning of the whole, the next 5 years from now, it's going to be a lot different. So now is the time to start looking for the future. So, I think it's great effort, and I hope that BOEM can play a role and be involved, because again, it affects all of us at BOEM.
Yeah, Dan, thanks so much for those comments. And it's really great to have you here. And you just answered a question. You sort of raised a question, but then answered it in your last comment. If we're going to look to the future and the change that we want to see happen in the future and what is going to happen, we need to start now. And with the understanding that the road to getting there is going to involve a lot of policy discussion. But right now we're in such a dynamic period of time where we're transitioning a lot of things on a huge scale with a lot of disruption. So we want to harness this disruptive time to start embedding some of these new ideas in the thinking, getting the research done while we can, to start shifting those directions. And I think from the conversations we've had, the companies of which the developers are part of globally are moving in these directions. So our ability to respond to that global movement here in the US is actually going to be a benefit to the industry and help give us the opportunity in this country to be contributing to that level of innovation. So we hear you, we're glad you're here, and we really look forward to working with BOEM to channel the disruption in the right direction.
Okay.
Thank you, Farah. To have a little bit of I don't see any other hands. David Michel, are you on? Because if you are, I think it would be fantastic to have sort of a state perspective comment.
Thank you, Dan. I am on, and I've been multitasking during the meeting, but trying to pay most attention to the meeting. As you know, in Connecticut, we're mourning the loss of one of our colleagues who passed away right after Inauguration Day in a car crash. So it's been a little tough here in Connecticut when we shut down everything legislative until Monday. But the perspective on offshore wind for the state of Connecticut, you can see it's right in my background. It's an actual nature inclusive approach, an approach that not only will protect the marine environment, and I keep repeating this in Connecticut, the ocean is the front line of defense against climate change. You can't pretend to fight against climate change while threatening the marine environment that is the very mechanism that is protecting us. And that is why after years of seeing presentation with monopiles and jacket piles and no graphics of any concrete gravity base for 4 years in presentations, that is why some of us in the state of Connecticut have taken on and asked Tufts University to give us a comparative study of the techniques on the footing of the offshore wind turbines. Again, we've not really focused on whatever is above water. We're focusing on what's underwater, which is where everything changes. The the approach from the developers from 2017 all the way to now has been very pushy towards monopiles. I think everybody knows this in the call. There's several tiers that we should all be looking at in terms of potential danger with that kind of technique. One, there are talks about the scour protections, and they've always said to us in Connecticut in 2019, first, that concrete gravity base was not a use technique when it's 10% of the offshore wind farms in the world. And when it's also most facilities in the water are standing on concrete. So it's absurd to say that concrete is not really used in this kind of construction. Then we have the idea that, so that's the noise part, but then there's everything else that is also worrying. I will say that right now I hear a lot about floating, but floating, in my view, might not be entirely viable. I mean, we have issues for the North Atlantic right wells, and I'm sorry, I'm spreading out all over the place, but let's first say why North Atlantic right wells are extremely important. Because the North Atlantic right well maintains, it's like a gardener, they maintain the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton is the source of three major things. One is carbon absorption. Two is the oxygen production. 50 to 80% of oxygen production, depending on where and when. That's humongous. And then the phytoplankton is the food for the zooplankton. So you lose phytoplankton, you lose your fish and your crustaceans. So keystone species are key in this case. And if there are more sensitive wildlife in the same waters on noise, then I will go and look for that noise threshold, and I want to put it in the environmental standards in our state. The second,
David,
yes.
Go ahead, Neil. You finish up. Sorry, I thought that was a finishing comment. No, please do. Please continue. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Sorry, you got to stop me though, because I'll talk for hours. Not in French, not in French. So we're looking at other things, right? The bentos, the water column, all these things are very important. So when I'm hearing was it a presentation from, was it Equinor or Ørsted? No, I think it was Ørsted, but both talk about the floating foundations. And I'm like, well, don't we have a problems with vertical lines in North Atlantic right well? So what happens with the North Atlantic right well if instead of going into a rope and gets entangled, what happens to a North Atlantic right well that goes into a cable? I don't know. And I don't know that anybody knows. So that is one thing that I would like people to pay attention to. Again, keystone species need to be protected. Otherwise, the marine environment as we know it will change, including protection for our lives. I mean, this is part of our life support system. We can't mess with it. And the language coming often from federal is sometimes scary because it seems dismissive that we could do it the wrong way.
Hey, David, I'm going to say you told me to stop you. So as you said, there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of uncertainty. And as one of the things we've been exploring in this project that we are doing for BOEM and Mass CEC is, even as it pertains to monopiles and other types of structures, of course, people are working at techniques to try and put them in more quietly. There's decisions we make in terms of perforations on the monopiles, the corrosion protection systems, et cetera, that could also have a very dramatic effect on the environment. So I think when we think about ways in which we can make improvements under the water, concrete is one of those ones which brings a lot of really nice attributes and needs a lot more attention than it has received. Yep. Similarly, we recognize, particularly through augmentation, because people have been looking, if you have a jacket, you can start to hang things on it, co-located aquaculture, other types of things. So when I look at it, I don't see it necessarily as, steel bad, concrete good. It's like we look at the different options, and there's always going to be compromise, and there's things we can be doing with existing traditional steel approaches that can still be more nature inclusive. There's a work that I believe is just about to be published and released. So some really effective new pile placement strategies that are considerably better than what people have been exploring to date with the pushing and vibration, et cetera, as opposed to pounding. So looking forward to learning about that. So innovation across a number of different design solutions will be continuously needed. We have So let me, I'm going to jump to something else because David and I and others, he's amazing. He's passionate. He's a representative in the legislature at Connecticut, and he's been really pushing for really doing things in very great, responsible ways. So David, thank you very much for your comments. Jennifer and Gordon, I want to ask you two a question, but I'm going to preface it first. So the way we've been thinking about it in this engine from a standpoint of economic development, when we think, for example, on Convergent Project number 1, where, we have WHOI involved, MBL, Florida Tech's doing some work, and we have some other partners as well. The way we think about it, we're going to start fabricating, for example, these 3D things that could be scour protection or small pieces of steel tubes, and we're going to be coating them. We're going to be adding, various types of sensors so we can put them in the water and we can learn. And the way we look at the relationship between, for example, that Convergent project and economic development is the research project goes forward and it does learning, it identifies where's the opportunity, engages people in a rigorous discussion. And then, like the town of New Bedford, which you folks represent, and the state can sort of say, hey, is there a real opportunity here? And if there is a really opportunity, what are the investment mechanisms that are needed to actually do it of the scale that it actually can provide some significant financial benefit? So when we think of the relationship between these convergent projects, being it the one where we're looking at nature inclusive scour protection, let's say, that are learning mechanisms for the ocean environment, or in the case of David just spoke in Connecticut about us looking at what are the things that we need to do to sort of look at counting for some of the advantages of concrete gravity foundations. What we see is the Convergent project does something, helps us to learn, brings a community together, communicates with the entities that have some capacity for investment, and then collectively we say, okay, what could we do? Perhaps starting in year 3, further down the line, maybe something more of a pilot stage where we have other investment dollars into, in fact, actually to make an advancement, which from NSF monies would not be sufficient to actually enable it to do it and wouldn't have the degree of engagement with the community that I think we want to achieve and that NSF really wants to have. So from both of you, it would be fantastic to get your reaction to that kind of a strategy of approach.
Jen's been in her job longer than I have, so she gets to go first.
Thanks, Gordon. I think as you've outlined the structure for the engine as it stands now, it sounds great. I think what's missing for Gordon and I is the recognition of existing industry, right? That you're going to be coming into these communities. In New Bedford's case, we have, as you know, a very robust commercial fishing and processing industry. As I was listening to the engine and how you lay this out, it becomes more exciting to me when you think about the intentional integration of commercial fishing and processing. When we think about societal benefits, and I think what the goal is around these projects, you got to think triple bottom line and existing industries. And in the case of New Bedford, you have an industry that counts for 2% of the Massachusetts GDP, right? Over $11 billion resulting from our commercial fishing and processing industry. So I think what you're outlining is really interesting. I think it has a lot of potential and is very exciting, but I think it becomes much more rich when you are engaging some of the stakeholders, at least in our community, that are so very key to the economy. And in the commercial fishing and processing industry, there are a lot of opportunities for upgrades, innovation that can not only help to sustain that industry, but also can support the environmental concerns that we all have and the sustainability concerns that we all have. And from our perspective in New Bedford, we don't want to see offshore wind and commercial fishing just coexist. We want to see those two industries thrive together because one of the things we're looking at the New Bedford Ocean Cluster is not just the advancement of these individual industries, which we very much care about, but we are really interested in how these industries can intersect and enter new markets together and really share the ocean in a way that is not just coexisting. Again, it's really forward thinking and thriving. And we have a lot of forward thinking fishermen in New Bedford that I think if you got them around the table would be very interested in some of the ideas you're talking about. So I don't know, Gordon, do you have anything to add?
Just a couple things. One, yes, right. Economic development, which was the nexus of your question, Dan, is an additive business, right? So we're not interested in replacing industries. And I would also say the other benefit, I think, of integrating at least some effects or benefits on the commercial fishing industry is we hear it pretty frequently. There's a high degree of hesitancy in that sector for the oncoming offshore wind, right? There has been sort of a latent uncertainty about it, and now it's actually coming. And I think we spend a lot of time working with the commercial fishing industry to prepare them for that. And we spent a lot of time with Dan and his colleagues at Bowen to figure out how that's going to work. And I guess the other way I might try to answer the question that you posed, Dan, about once you have some of these technologies and some of these demonstration applications, I sort of go to who's the customer, right? Who's the end user? The question really that I think you're asking goes to the actual developers, right? And either there are benefits for them to try to test these out or to deploy them, or again, Dan and his regulatory folks will require it, right? But those are the only two ways that the developers, I think, are going to adopt and integrate some of these things. There are either benefits, there's cost savings, or there are requirements, I think. So we on the port side and the city side will be followers, I would say, on that, as far as how to take it from the incredible work that you guys are doing and the research and the analysis that you're doing towards actual application. And then the other thing I would say, again, as we said when we were in the mayor's office, Dan, I don't see Kevin still on the call, I don't think, but I would urge you to, sorry, Kevin Stokesbury, I was talking, not different Kevin, sorry, apology. Oh, you are there, great, excellent. I didn't expand my screen, I apologize, nice to see you. Is to loop the School of Marine Science and Technology into a lot of this on a much more direct basis. Their applied research and their knowledge of both sides of the industry, I think, would be hugely valuable. So I'm just going to put in a shameless plug for Kevin and his colleagues at SMAS.
Agreed.
I hope that was somewhat responsive to your question.
Yeah, I
Dan.
don't know if we answered the question, but
No. I think the perspective that you shared is a critical perspective, and NSF, the people who are invited to review this proposal, right? They won't have the perspective the people that are even on this call, right? And so, in many ways, for this engine to be successful, probably in more than many ways, it's really it's your groups who need to ground truth this. And as you said, it's about people coming together for discussion. One of the reasons is showing that big circle of just the complexity of it. And as you said, you need to work with the folks, Dan O'Connell and Bohm, to actually doing this, and the environmental group and everything else. So it's we hear you. Not only do we hear you, it's like that's sort of the driving way we need to be thinking about these types of things. And Kevin, it's great to hear you. And maybe I'll have ask you for a comment in just a second. But before we do that, we've tried to learn quite a bit, of course, from what our European colleagues is. And of all the various countries, everybody always says, well, the Netherlands actually approach this in the most thoughtful way, because years ago, before getting into offshore wind whatsoever, right, before they started to do anything of significant scale, they said, we're going to create groups of experts around a lot of individual topics, and then we're going to listen to them, and we're going to do what they tell us is the best thing to do, right? And so I think everybody's applauded the Netherlands' efforts, for example, to say, you know what, before we go through and auction these lease areas, we're going to go out and do our own geophysical and geotechnical investigation, and we're going to make that public. This will allow for more competitive bids. And at the same time, the most critical aspects, it means the data that's collected is a public record. So we are actually learning in the process of doing it, right? So that's an example of one amazing idea in this direction. And I was looking to see if Luca from Deltaris was on. I didn't know if she would be. She isn't, so I'll speak sort of for her. But it is really the case that if you actually look at now the bid requirements for developers in all of the tenders and everything in the Netherlands, it's like, what is the environmental impact? Because I think the question, and rightly stated, right, is like, the developers have to do this. Things are very competitive. Who is the market? I think part of that is, at least the thinking is, hey, what's in the best interest of society? And if we have the data to be able to actually present what is in the best interest of society, then policymakers, and right, that can be the DOER or something like that in Massachusetts, can be looking at a bidding process, and they list all these metrics of evaluation, and developers put forth very often multiple bids, right? So that the state can then select based on whatever value it attributes to something. And if there's data and quantifiable value to doing some of the types of things that we described, I think that is one of the very powerful mechanisms for moving it in directions that we think is very good. But Kevin, it would be nice to, as someone who works with the developers an incredible amount and has been thinking about these issues for a lot of years, it'd be nice to have your sort of comment. And then I think it's been 2 hours, and then maybe we should probably let people go, but we've had half the people stay on till this point. So that's, I think, a statement of people sort of interested in this discussion. But it'd be nice to have your comments on what, on the overall objective and, how you think we should be looking at these matters.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I of course, am supportive of the overall objective, as we're part of it, and glad to be a part of it. I do think that the challenges of not detrimentally affecting the fishing industry are going to be pretty massive. And I think, to be honest, I think the target's changing as well. I thought, for example, that all the developers were following the 1x1 nautical mile grid that the Coast Guard proposed, but I've just heard recently that might not be the case down in the mid-Atlantic. And so, those kind of shifts, although perhaps that seems trivial, but it's the difference between a vessel having access into that area or not. And there's scientific ramifications, increased uncertainty on the estimates of fish stocks. There's changes in the biology, and as some of the presentations have shown here, they're starting to get to it. So it's a very timely proposal. It is fairly massive, and I also think that getting out ahead of this, because the leases are now starting to be approved on the West Coast as well, and floating turbines in the Gulf of Maine, that's going to be another issue. I know some people think maybe they'll work, maybe they won't, but it seems like things are going. What I'm struck with all of it is how all of a sudden it's so full throttle. And really, when you compare the European to the North American experience here, the Europeans have developed at a growth rate of roughly 20%, whereas we're heading into this at 80%. I mean, we're going from 0 to 100, and yeah, so I guess it's gonna be a wild ride.
I was gonna chime in and make a similar point to Kevin, which is not to be glass half empty, but time is not our friend with this, right? For both the developers and the regulators, right? We all have are feeling a high degree of urgency for this, right? And I will speak only for myself, but sometimes my dumbest decisions were made in haste, right? So it's we got to be very cautious about that, I think, and that's where a lot of the research that you're talking about undertaking is so important, I would say. So, not to end it on a downer, Dan, because it's been a great conversation. But.
No, I thank you very much for that, because I think everybody recognizes the complexity and the problems that are out there, and if we ignore them, it doesn't mean the problem goes away. That it does take a very broad community to, in fact, actually do this, which of course has been the nature of the approach. And it's, but this, this is probably a good opportunity to start. And we, the people who wrote the proposal together, right, the 18 organizations, and I actually logged over 200 Zoom meetings associated with this, and the number of hours is, we don't even want to count the number of hours if you look at everybody collectively. But I think what's happened is, with this entity that we now refer to ourselves as MOCEAN, people were like, oh yeah, hopefully NSF will fund this. Regardless, we need to do this, and we need to find other mechanisms for making progress. Even if we can't do it all like a plan for 10 years, we got to find a mechanism to start as soon as possible on so many of these elements. We need to keep the community together and have the right relationships and everything else. So, I think we all recognize the importance of these types of things. So thank you for your comment on that, Gordon. That could almost be a closing comment. Does anybody else have one final thing they'd like to say? If not, what I'll do is I'll just thank you for your time and make brief comment on next step. Does anybody have a closing comment?
Thank you, Dan, for the incredible effort to organize and lead this group, and Farah's help and the whole team that's leading this. Just thank you for making it easy for us to participate.
Yeah, well, it's a topic is everybody knows that this is an important thing to work on. So it's been self-selling. There's been no arm twisting whatsoever. You folks have all just been absolutely amazing and throughout all of this. And so next steps, everybody who was invited to this will be getting an email. There'll be a link to the recording. The slides I've already distributed in PDF format. And as well, we're going to have a link to the Jamboard, which mentioned is going to be open for a week. It will contain links to some office hours next week as people reflect on things. If they have thoughts and comments, you can put it in Jamboard. You can send in an email. You can come to one of the office hours next week. We will also distribute the proposal. And the instructions for the proposal are going to say, we've been doing this iterative writing on it, but we still got probably a lot of wordsmithing to do. Don't try and wordsmith anything. Look at it, think about content, what we're trying to achieve. Is it realistic? What are we missing? And then just write in comments. And then what we'll do is we'll take those into consideration to the best degree that we can with all of the other constraints. We are establishing a website in which we have a lot of resources that we're going to be able to reference indirectly in the proposal. So it's going to be a source of growing information, because everybody in this great team together have been saying, oh, someone should read this, or this is a great informative video that would be wonderful to see. So our entity will create an outreach mechanism in that way. So thank you everybody for your time today. This has been incredible. Greatly appreciated. Looking forward to the continued conversation.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.